Hafa day, everyone. My name is Amara San Agustin, and I'll be hosting today's episode of Fanachu. I hope everyone had a really good Thanksgiving. If there's one thing tomorrow's love, it's definitely family and food. So I'm sure we all had a good time. Today we have a very special guest with us. If you guys don't know by my obnoxious uploading to Instagram and Facebook, our Fanatu is working on a zine right now. And if you don't know what a zine is, basically it's sort of like a homemade magazine. And as of right now, it's going to be a virtual zine, but we are figuring out if we'll be able to get physical copies. So that's really exciting. It's called Voices of the Diaspora. And basically, this scene's going to focus on Chamorros who are not currently on Guahan. And basically, their stories, it's different mediums. So it's going to be photographs, music, it's going to be short stories, poems. Deja actually, she submitted a submission of her artwork, and I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the one. And she is actually going to be doing the front page of our zine. So you get to see her work in January if everything goes as planned. And then she'll also have a few submissions in there as well. So Deidre, if you could just give us, tell us a little about yourself, where you're from, where you currently live, and whatnot.
Yeah, so half a day. It's in Buenos Toro. Just so excited. I'm very privileged and humbled to be invited into Panatsu. And of course, like when Amara, you reached out to me asking me about my art and everything like that. I was just so blown away. It's been a while since I've actually drawn or like illustrated anything. So, when you sent me that message or like to just like ask if I wanted to help with the front cover of Voices of Diaspora. I was like, what? Really?
One thing
uh,
about Deidre, guys, she is one of the most humble people you ever met. Just putting that out there. But yeah, we're so excited. I just saw she just sent me um the final artwork for the front cover, and oh my gosh, guys, it's so beautiful and we're really excited. I have lots of work to do, but hopefully I can do everyone justice, just because we received an outpour of submissions. So yeah, sorry I interrupted you. I was just talking about how humble you were. But yeah, if you could tell me, I know we have talked for a little bit. Just I know you're in school. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
yeah. So a little bit of background. I was born and raised in Guahan, in the village of Totu, Barrigada, so like central, right? And so I moved out to the continent or to Washington State when I was like around high school and kind of just I stayed there with my family all the way throughout high school and then of course going into college at the University of Washington. So there was surprisingly, because I was one of the Chamorro kids, like, kind of like having to leave behind high school and then entering another high school, it was a little bit of a culture shock, but then also realizing that like I was probably one of the few Chamorros in that high school, Spanaway Lake High School, whose parents weren't in the military. So understanding what that meant at such a young age and going through your adolescence was a little bit like scary, right? But then also there's also a privilege behind saying like, oh, well, I'm born and raised in Guahan, right? And like identifying that as my home, whereas like here I'm a settler. This was me in Washington State or Coast Salish territory. So I'm not sure if I'm asking the question or answering the question. What was the question? I'm so sorry.
Um, yeah, no, just background about yourself. Yeah, so funny. I actually used to live in Totu very briefly, and then I also used to live in Spanaway for a little bit too. So that's
Really? Oh my gosh. That's
I
so cool.
knew we both lived in Washington, but that is so fun.
Yeah. Because I remember you telling me that you went back to I think Olympia, if I
Yeah.
yeah.
So my parents, my dad lived in Olympia, and then my mom briefly. She's in Florida now. I'm also in Florida now, but she lived in Spanaway. And yeah, they have a pretty big. The best thing about Washington, they have a huge Chamorro population. I guess the West Coast in general, but especially Spanaway. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just crazy. So I went to high school there and then of course continued into attending my undergrad at the University of Washington, where I started off with nursing, but then it eventually moved into medical anthropology and global health because there was just a little more support there. I found there were other Chamorro students who were in anthropology, including Palauan and Yapi students. Well, not really students, right? They're more like my best, like some of my closest friends now, and um, that I continue to like collaborate with, or just check in. Now that I am where I am here, so fast forward, I did my master's in cultural studies again at the University of Washington until later deciding that I wanted to do a PhD. Crazy. And what kind of like got me into just thinking about the PhD route was around the time my nana is I was born, okay, I'm like struggling here with the introduction part. So yeah, I was born and raised in Totu Veragada, which is where my family and I our property is at, or our house is at right now. And I identify mostly with my dad's paternal or my dad's parents because I was raised by my dad, Randy Flores Crisostomo, as a single parent, and then his mom and dad and his sisters. So my nana's name is Josefina Flores Crisostomo, and um my tata's name is Francisco Jose Crisostomo. So like we're all from there, but I believe like family name wise, my grandpa's side we're Familian Manuk and Familian Bedzung, and my grandma's side is Familian Quetzon, Kapili, and Dinong. So like literally within the Toto area. And then I believe we also like have family throughout like Mongmong and Asan and all those places. So yeah, just tracing back to that, and then going, I guess, just like thinking more so about my nana. Surprisingly, her anniversary from her passing is on the 30th. So that's something like very, very meaningful to me. And she was the one who was like, um she was either encouraging me to either go back home to Guahan or like, or stay and, continue my PhD. And I was like, oh, I'll continue my PhD, right? And around the time that she told me that, it was like right after I graduated from my master's and still applying um to different universities, one of them being the University of Hawai'i at Manoa, which I'm currently at right now. And yeah, that was quite the adventure, the journey. And the only reason why I say that because as I was applying for my PhD program, I was actually sitting like in different like hospital rooms, the ER, physical therapy units. And it was around the time when, my nana got sick. So at that time I was thinking a lot about grief. Um, I guess it's just different, right? Because like not only was I grieving myself, but also grieving with my family in Washington, and then also having to, make those WhatsApp phone calls back home to make sure that everything was happening back home, from, setting up the rosary, the Lesadzu, and everything like that. So there was a lot of responsibility that came, from, I guess, just being a granddaughter and a daughter. And um like I put like, shout out to all the Chamorro family out there, not only like, throughout the diaspora, but also at home too, who have like so much responsibility. Like I feel like we carry so much love, care, and healing for our families. And, you know, just that's something that like sticks so true to me, or like so hard with me. But yeah, now I'm in my third year right now, at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, in the political science program, but I'm specializing in Indigenous politics. And since it is my third year, it's proposal writing season. So I've been trying to put my ideas together, and most of it have been around, I guess, like collective grieving, asking how do we sit with that, with like the uncomfortableness of grief, and how is it a very like intimate space for many of us who engage in those practices, and um how does it like create some kind of, I guess, like healing space for those of us who our loved ones did pass during or who have experienced the passing of a loved one during the pandemic, or fall, or like up to now when COVID hasn't gone away. But yeah, I would say that's like a little bit about me. I don't know, like there's so many different like ways I introduce myself, but yeah, I just wanted to tell that story because I'm always like bringing my nana into the space with me, and acknowledging her. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm personally find it awkward to talk about myself, so I always like try to bring someone in with me, so that way it's like
Your
comforting.
Nana, I mean, she obviously is a huge part of you, you know. So, yeah, I feel like how were you on island when she passed?
Yeah, no, we weren't on island when she passed. We were all in Washington, so that's what made it even more difficult because like everyone back home, my tata especially, was like we had to put the lesadzu together, we had to go to the church, and there were so many like different responsibilities, um and of course like there's a whole bunch of like things going on with like land rights back home too, right? So he's trying to make it like trying to initiate that like our family just be like buried on our property instead of like so he's very like firm about like us just following through with like how we normally do things traditionally when it comes to like the passing of a loved one. But yeah, being honestly like being in Washington, I had realized that something that isn't as like emphasized in the mainland as it is like back in Guahan or like the Northern Marianas is that there's a lot more emotional resources for us when we go back home when it comes to the passing of a loved one. Whereas in the, I don't want to call it the mainland, right? I'm going to call it the continent. Whereas in the continent, there's not as much emotional resources. And a lot of folk, and I kind of like think about that often. Like when we do have loved ones who pass away, what kind of emotional resources are out there for us? And when I say emotional resources, I mean like, access to a tetsa that is more than just word of mouth. Because oftentimes it's word by word of mouth, right? Like tan chai, um, feffing or so and so. But um, that's what I've been thinking a lot about. And I think that comes from the experience of how much of a struggle it was for my family and I to, it's like so many of us were just struggling at like it being so sudden that she got sick. And at the time it was pre-COVID. So the doctors just kept coming up to us and like asking us like, oh, did she eat this? Did she do this? What were her living conditions like? And they kept trying to diagnose what she was going through without like us being fully aware at the time, where her symptoms just appeared as if they were COVID, and once COVID happened, that's when I was like, it all makes sense, but it was just really wrong timing, like bad timing. I wish there would have been more done than just like, switching between physical therapy, um, like intensive care and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's something that I'm trying to like, I'm still trying to unpack. I would say that, up to like grief is not easy to deal with. It's still, very fresh in my mind, although it was like around 3 years ago. And the thing that hits me the most is like it happened right before I entered my PhD program. So um it's just crazy how I guess like how timing works, like how things happen, and then one thing leads to another. But she also reminded me, like, she's still here with me and pushing me every step of the way. So she knew that, I feel like she knew that being, PhD student was going to be challenging for me, but if she didn't think I would be able to do it, then she would have, stopped me along the way. But she's always like, guiding me. I'm pretty much, since I was raised by my dad's side of the family, I'm pretty much the nanny of the family on his side. Whereas with my siblings, I'm the oldest one. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like being a part of the diaspora, one of the hardest parts is in that case, especially because Guam, being it's it's so far from the US.
Yeah.
It's a territory not because of convenience, it's because it's a strategic location. But yeah, I feel like it's so hard. Just because my grandpa is also he's still in Guam. I have family still in Guam, and it's so expensive, to go back to bring like your whole family. And Chamorros have big families, just to bring back your whole family to Guam and just trying to keep in contact, and especially like in a time of grief, how like you were saying that there aren't a lot of resources because people aren't going to understand in the mainland like some people will understand but a lot of people won't understand how it feels to be away from someone you love so much that is getting sick that you've come to terms that is going to die soon. It's still hurts. I remember my grandma, she passed away in 2015, and I remember being in college, and um we flew her back to Guam to be buried, which is her wishes. And I remember she died in 2015. I did not see her grave till about 2018. I didn't get to visit her grave, which I mean, it's hard, but it's so expensive. It's so far away. Washington, I think that's the closest point, like from the mainland, right, to Guam.
Uh, I think for yeah, because oftentimes I would just from Washington, like normally we would like go Washington, like California, Hawaii, then Guam, and then of course before Japan had like closed its doors and everything like that, we used to like go through Narita and everything like that. But yeah, it can be really expensive,
Yeah,
especially when you're trying to fly family out. But not only that, but like, when your loved one passes away and then their wishes are to be buried in Guahan, like, it's like you have to consider the cost for that too. And I feel like there's it's hard to like think about like your home at a distance when it comes to finances, right? And I feel like it's always like US capital and finances that really like set up that I want to say like that point of where like what can we afford, what is accessible, and what is it that's missing here that the US doesn't, it just doesn't like compensate enough. And when I say compensate, I'm more so like thinking about like how many of our grandparents are um I guess like within their 70s. For some of us they're in their 60s or like older than 70s and stuff like that. And um like many of them come from generations that either like moved away from Guahan or the Northern Marianas for the military or college, for example. Or it's like there's some kind of like not try like our I feel like throughout Guahan and the Northern Marianas we've always been like traveling anyways, right? um it's never been like this place of like being stagnant on an island and then going abroad, right? And I feel like what makes it interesting is that I just don't think that traveling home should be that expensive. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
For how much bodies, you know, for how much bodies of labor get taken from our homelands
Right.
and are throughout, like, the continent, Hawaii and everything like that. I really don't think that they should be charging us that much. It's like, majority of the military or bodies in the military are Chamoru soldiers. Like, a lot of folks, especially within like our generation right now, are in universities, and we come from families that are kind of like this 1.5 generation, where 1.5 generation meaning, like, it's like we have the experiences of being both, of having that privilege of being both home in Guahan, or like, Saipan and Luta or anywhere else, and then also having the privilege of being out in the continent, um but yeah, if life would just be so much easier if they just made things cheaper for those of us who are, just honestly trying to live,
Yeah.
trying to make sure that each other is taken care of, especially our families who, are always, I know for me it's like, just making sure that they're okay. And um even though I'm like out here, I'm out here in Hawaii, so
Yeah. Um, do you carry I know I feel this. I'm not sure if anyone else is, but do you carry, of course, you're out here to better yourself, obviously. You're getting a PhD. Oh my goodness. Do you ever carry any guilt from just being far away from your family?
hmm yeah, I feel like it's half and half. I carry guilt because I think I had brought up earlier, just like as a Chamorro woman, I feel like there's just like a lot of responsibilities, and um and what that even means, right? What does it mean to be a Chamorro woman? What's expected of us? I feel like that's so like crazy, right?
Know the answer yet. Next podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that's a question that like we're still, like, we're continuing to unpack, right? Because honestly, where am I going with this? Yeah, I going back to the question. Yes, I do feel a lot of guilt. Mostly before, I used to have a lot of guilt because, with my grandma passed, like my tata is in Guahan right now, and he's 81, and my dad is in Washington. So it's like, I don't want my dad to be by himself, and then I also don't want my tata to be by himself either, because he's elder, he's my uncle, and everything like that. But um I guess like what's reassuring is when they both talk to me and tell me, like, you are where you need to be, and that we want you to be there. We just want you to finish off school, and then when you can visit us, come visit us, right? But it's so hard to hear that, because it's like it's like, yes, I can visit you whenever I'm free, but it's like I want to visit you every day. Like, I there's so much healing that happens when, like, you go back home, and it's like you don't have to worry about turning in a midterm paper or writing or publishing, you know what I mean, or applying for a grant or a scholarship. It's like if I want to feed, I don't know, feed my chickens, or like just play around with the dogs, like, or I don't know, like, just do something like that. If you, I don't know, go to, I was about to say Tomorrow Village, but
Tomorrow Village.
yeah, like, it's like those, um it's like just knowing the feeling of like what that feeling of being home just doesn't ever go away, and I feel for anyone within that, well, I there's like different forms of diaspora. I feel like there's, like, a lot of Chamorros who are born in the continent, right? And maybe have never been home, or they were born in the continent and have only gone home to like visit family, or I guess for myself it's weird too, because like, born in Guahan but then out here. So there's just like these different experiences and feelings of what it means, of what that is. And aside from, being sweaty and it's always hot, and it's like I wouldn't be wearing this. I would just be wearing like, my bahaki. Yeah. Yeah, it's like my hair would be up and all that kind of stuff. But like where was it? Where was I going with this? Yeah, I think too the so that I feel guilty about that, right? Like not having like more than one of me to just like stretch out and like go wherever I need to go, but also especially during this time, right? When again November 30th is my Nana's anniversary, and I know that there's like, we do a rosary like every year for her, and even though it's like already past like the first year of her passing. But I want to say that like, during the first year of my nana's like passing, I was there. But then every year after that, I couldn't go back to Washington. And most of the time it's like, just the timing again. It's like Thanksgiving break is so short. Like it's literally so short. It practically ends on the 30th, right when, that all like the prayers and stuff happen. So it's not like I could stay there without like, talking to professors, and of course like kind of planning things out because it's around finals week. So it's like this inner conflict going on because I want to be there, but then again, it it's like it's such like it feels like tug of war almost, like, but I always tell myself that like once I get these papers over with, then I'll go back home, and just like, see my family, because I see so much of her in them, and I feel like she would understand. She was always such she was always so understanding, and always putting others before like, herself and everything like that. But it's just interesting how like, when it comes to celebrating her and her life, I always like want to do that, right? Because again, like to remember her is also to like, relive those memories, and her jokes and everything like that. So yeah, that's what's really getting at me right now.
Yeah.
And I always wonder if like other folks like think the same way too, like, when you're not able to be at two places at once, or even like I know for a lot of folks in the diaspora it's about like navigating that identity, right, of what it means to be Chamorro. But I think more so it's um oh yeah, just this whole like game of identity politics. But for me it's also like trying to just like relive those memories or feelings of like emotion, right? Like I don't know, like laughing, crying, joking with friends and family. There's a whole different vibe that you get. Like, for example, if you go to like the McDonald's and there's a whole bunch of my uncle there, just like drinking their coffee. And, I was on WhatsApp the other day. I was calling my tata, and like, he's like 81 years old, and he's doing like the cha-cha in the middle of McDonald's. And like, I'm lagging on WhatsApp, but I'm over here like, could you like hold on, like your legs, you have arthritis, But it's like, it's just funny because it's like, even though I feel those inner conflicts, like I also know that like, my family's doing fine, right? My family's doing fine, and also I feel like I don't know. There's just like so much support too, right? And I hope that a lot of like um I guess like youth, especially in the diaspora, have like that similar type of like support coming from um either their immediate family or those who they identify as their family, right? Like chosen families and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah, that's a long-winded question. I feel like I'm always running on tangents and everything, but it's just
It's so comforting to me to hear like someone, experience, because I'm in Florida and there's not a lot of Chamorros here, besides the people like that aren't, you're not really related, but they're family.
oh yeah.
She's not really your auntie, but she's your auntie type thing. But it's so comforting to hear all of this. And just circling back to what you were talking about, I think for me, because I also experienced that guilt, that tug of war. I think what I try to remember is that, like, with every step in the right direction you take, or with every accomplishment, that's also, you're representing your whole family, representing your nana, your papa, your dad, your whole family.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, that too. And then also, I guess like um just make or what am I trying to go for? Like create spaces where people can be a little bit more like creative on how like we approach our futures, right? Like so much, I mean, yes, so much of like what we do maybe for our families, but maybe like for a lot of us too, it may be just to create like new ways of, I guess, like new ways of healing or continuing to heal and continuing to love and, I guess like just be vulnerable with one another, and it's, and the reason why I say that too is because like, I feel like when I was in Washington, I met with different Chamorros here and there who a lot of them, it's like they were there specifically for military purposes and they just, of course, like they wanted to find area or like spaces where other Chamorros were at. So of course, like you'd find everyone at the fiestas or, at so and so's house for so and so's birthday or baby showers, So I it's interesting how like, those um like the areas where we or the places where we find like our communities are like, very like tight knit or close knit and everything like that. And always like, in celebration um and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean being in Hawaii here too, like, I
DJ.
have oh sorry.
Oh my gosh, we have less than 1 minute. Okay,
Oh,
I'm gonna end this. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna end it and then call you back. Okay, back after technical difficulties. I guess on this note, trying to start on the note we left off. How is it? So I've never personally been to Hawaii, which is kind of surprising. I feel like as an islander from Guam, I should have been there some point or the other, but I have been to the airport. But yeah, I guess being from Guam, was there, how was the culture shock experience there compared to, I guess, living in Washington?
yeah. I don't know. I feel like it actually it wasn't really a culture shock being here or moving here, mostly because it reminds me, it's really close to home, in Guahan and everything. But I think something that really stood out to me was just from like living in Washington, the tourist culture is just so much different. It's like, when I was staying in Washington, or being in Guahan, it's like I go to like Matapang Beach or anything like that, or I go to Chamorro Village and it's like you see tourists there, right? But I feel like out here it's like their presence is a little more apparent. Um, and maybe again, like it could just be when I was in Washington too, where I would go to like Pike's Place or the Space Needle. And even around the University of Washington campus, like during the spring where people are like taking pictures of the cherry blossoms at the quad and everything. But it's like you get like this vibe, when when tourists are visiting there, because like they'll out loud say like, oh, let's take a picture here, let's take a picture here. And you're there like, okay, I'm just trying to buy some like, fresh produce. But I feel like here it's that would not it's not really a culture shock, but just how apparent tourism is.
Mhm.
How, like, for example, I can go to class in Saunders Hall, which is where like political science is at UH Manoa. And I have this classroom where we look out the window and all you see is like all these industry buildings, cranes and everything like that. And most of them are situated in like Waikiki. Um, of course, which has like, the largest number of like tourists coming into that area. And everything just looks like, everything just like it has like that same kind of structure of like all the mall spaces or shopping areas. Kind of like if you go back to Guahan and like, there's like Gucci, Rolex,
Yeah.
all that, like, those stores up there. Yeah. So they have the same structure here. So I wouldn't say it was like quite as culture shock. It was just more of like how heightened the presence of like a certain population of people can like really be apparent. Because and it's interesting too, right? Because like I know, like, in addition to militarism or military occupation and presence in like Guahan and the Northern Marianas, like there's also that increased presence here in Hawaii as well. Hawaii being like, it's like, an occupied kingdom with like, the overthrown Queen Liliuokalani. But I just wanted I guess like that's something that, like, it was kind of like I was returning to something familiar,
Mhm.
even though I didn't want it to be familiar, because I know how much harm the military has caused, the tourist industry has caused, not only to our islands, but geopolitically, and where it places us geopolitically in relation to other like countries and people, um, whether they know us or not. So it was interesting, like being in Guahan, and it's like being so used to hearing like the like airplanes, not even airplanes, but like warplanes, like the B-52. It's like you hear one airplane fly off like from Delta, and then another, like, and you can tell the difference. And I felt like, not that I've heard any here, but I've heard like a lot of helicopters here. And I haven't the sound of helicopters flying overhead. I was mostly used to that in Washington when I was living like, near like JBLM, the base and
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
then with airplanes too, I was like, oh my gosh, like just being here, it's like I was kind of reminded, or it kind of gave me like a sense of nostalgia, um of like, just like living back home. And it's kind of crazy to think about, I feel like.
Is
Yeah.
there so Hawaii is a state, Guam is a territory, is there? Do you feel like any sort of difference? Like in the like I guess maybe levels of occupation or
mm, that's Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I feel like when it comes to the level of occupation, it's like a mirror image, like I feel like when it comes to, especially, okay, so when it comes to militarism, I feel like the military, especially, they always, like, they just copy and paste, right? It's like you go to Guahan, there's like, issues with our water and our resources, or our access to water, and even the cost of water, right? You come out here and the same thing, and it's the same thing. Water is expensive. Access to water is always brought up about within today, like, within the politics of Hawaii, especially like, with Red Hill, right? like the same type of issues that the military especially doesn't want to acknowledge going on with like Kapukaki or Red Hill is like the same type of water issues that are happening like back home in Guahan. And I know like there's like Guam water protectors, right, who like talk a lot about that. Just like a couple of people on like social media and Instagram who like, like yeah, I honestly feel like it's mirror images. And if anyone wants to correct me on that, like, more than welcome to. But like, yeah, it's it's just really devastating.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like to think about that, like the same type of issues with tourism, um, and how much like, Guam's tourism, like, funds, like the economy is like the same type of issues that happen here in Hawaii. So, and something else that I also want to acknowledge too is like, the same type of issues that happen with like anti-Micronesian sentiments that happen back home in Guahan are also the same thing that happen here too. So I feel like that's like a further conversation, right? About how I guess like I mean there are a lot of amazing groups and a lot of amazing like activists out there who really, they're at the heart of movements, at the heart of like, deoccupying the military, which I feel is so important to acknowledge. But yeah, I feel like because they're mirror images of like, militarism, it's like easier to point out and to I guess like situate where we are, right, in position to like our occupiers. But yeah, yeah, I would
Yeah.
say, but there is a lot, like there is a lot of movement happening, right, like fighting against militarism, having people send in testimony, using art and poetry as testimony, which I feel like is the most like amazing. And so like, you know, it's so wholesome to know that there's a lot of artists too, like artists and poets coming out who like speak against that, because like even in our own communities, even being Chamoru, like there are some times where, you just trying to like navigate those spaces where it's like you don't want to like trauma dump and like have to relive the history of like what has happened to our communities and everything, but also like with I guess like with art, it's like another way of speaking, and also remembering that like our ancestors, it's like they use art too to express their love or express their like sadness and everything like that. So I guess it's just a relearning and unlearning of like having those conversations, but also yeah, just acknowledging that military presence out here in Hawaii is very prominent, and like the same thing that's happening here is also happening back home. So it's really cool when you see like Chamorros having conversations with like, like Native Hawaiians out here, and so many people who are supporting each other. Especially in my department, I feel like that would um not like it's an interview for school. But yeah, I feel like that's what makes like at least people in my department so cool, is that like, they're aware of what's going on. Like that, like it's nice being in a place where you don't have to always have to explain yourself, or like have to answer these questions about like, where Guam is at, or like what military presence is like there, especially since people always like, they know Guam for that being like, oh yeah, I know Guam, I've been there before for vacation, or I was stationed there before when I was in the Navy. So yeah, it's nice being here.
I feel like for me, that's one of the hardest parts about being in the diaspora is like you're teaching every single day. You're teaching everyone about you say I say I'm from Guam, and then they're like, oh, are your parents in the military? And that's kind of an offensive question. Like I get, I don't take it on them, but it does sort of hurt when the first thing they associate with this beautiful island that, that means so much to me, that I've like my ancestors and all this rich history and beautiful culture, that they just, assume right away that, the first thing that comes to their head is like war, you know,
Oh yeah.
which is just so, it's really sad. And I'm so glad to have Fanatsu as an outlet, because for so many years, I was so angry at just this thought of people not knowing, I guess, what Guam is. And I mean, I've accepted that, and that, it doesn't make me angry anymore. I think, it's it's an honor, that I am able to be in a position to teach people, what Guam is, where it is, um what happened there, all the things that happened there. It's, it's hard. It's like
Yeah.
emotionally taxing for sure.
I remember like attending high school and it's like a new student there and the teacher wants you to introduce yourself and you're like, hello, my name is Randizia. And they, one of the questions like, oh, where are you from? And so of course I say like, oh, I'm from Guam. And it was interesting to see like the facial expressions. I remember the facial expressions of like my classmates at the time. Some of them knew where it was, right? Because those were like the Chamorro students, or even some of the like Samoan students in my class who were friends with the Chamorro students. Um, and so like, a lot of them knew, of course, like, they're like, oh my gosh, another Chamorro student, right? To like, to talk about like our home. But I remember the teacher being like, oh, can you tell us a little more? Like, and I was like, at the time I was like, girl, like,
It's like
hello.
asking someone your favorite song. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I forgot how to talk. Like,
Yeah. And I just remember like at the time when as a high school student, I was like, oh, it's like, a small island. It's right by the Philippines, probably 7 hours away from the Philippines. It's closer to Japan. And then like someone would be like, oh, so it's a part of Asia, like you're Asian. And I was like, no, like it's a part of the Pacific, Hawaii. And it's like always having to use islands in proximity to your own to define like where you like that your home is present and alive and is there, right? And I just remember like, after introducing myself and then when class was over, one of the Chamorro students was like, I hate it when they ask that question. And then they told me they're like, sometimes I just say that I'm from Hawaii. And I was like, why? Why do you do that? And then they're like, because I'm so tired of explaining, right? Especially, and so I was starting to think like, oh my gosh, like how like as a 16-year-old saying that, right? Like how many more tomorrow 16-year-olds say that as a way of just like having people just put their foot like in the door. But I feel like nowadays, people are a little more like, open. I say nowadays like I'm in some kind of like older generation. Oh my gosh. Anywho, like yeah, I feel like people are like less likely to do that now, which is, amazing to see. Like, there's so many Chamorro artists like out in Washington, who like, they travel back and forth home, between home and, Washington and even out here in Hawaii to like, share their art and to show this like wonderfulness of like what it is to be like, what it is, the many parts of what it means to be Chamorro. And that's what makes it beautiful, is that there's not one way of being it or one way of being like authentic Chamorro and anything like that, whatever authenticity is. But I feel like because like so many of us like we're in this space where we're always learning and unlearning and remembering um all of like what makes us us, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like for generations already, like so much of our manunku and our elders have, you know, gone through like they know what it's like to go through, trauma. And when I say trauma, it's like you don't only need to come out of the military to suffer from PTSD. So much of our Manumko and our elders suffer from that just by being civilians through the experiences of, having to either navigate these like difficult spaces of I guess like supporting themselves or supporting our families. But yeah, like yeah. I just there's just like so much, where am I going? There's so much amazing things happening now.
Yeah.
And even if, you know, like yes, like there are a lot of Chamorros out in the diaspora, and I feel like it's such a complex term even or identity to unpack. Like it's weird to say like, oh, I'm a Chamorro from the diaspora, but then like even that alone, right? So yeah, I can even say like I honestly have complications like issues with that,
Mhm.
right? Like because like when people talk about the diaspora, I feel like all of a sudden it's like this separation, right? Not only like a separation from our identities, but a separation from our homes, the places that we identify of home. And it's kind of like this inclusive versus exclusive, like who's in the know and who isn't, right? And especially now, like for example, like people are you have a conversation about independent Guahan, but maybe someone in or Chamorro in the diaspora may not necessarily understand what independence means, right? In terms of being back in Guahan or being situated in the Northern Marianas or anywhere, right? Where they're like, what does that conversation look like? What does independence even look like, right? Whereas I know like in Washington, majority of the time it's about disaggregating data, you know, creating pipelines from high school to college for Pacific Islander students, um, or stuff like that. So I feel like I guess it just like comes to show how I guess like just that term alone it reveals so many parts, like moving parts of our culture that are happening. And rather than it being like a separation, it could be like a returning to, right? Like a way of returning to, because there are so many issues in our communities even that like we can like go on and on about that in this call. But it's like like our conversations about, it's like you can't have conversations about anti-Micronesian sentiments until you have conversations about anti-blackness, or of racism, which is of course highly present in our communities too. You can't have conversations about like separation and erasure without having conversations about the diaspora, or there's that one term like brain drain too, right? For those of us who are in universities. Um and yeah, there's so many like moving parts to it. And um I think like one of the issues is when like we only see diaspora for it being a separation of like a body from their homeland, because it's like we're not separated, like we come from like this long and vast line of like ancestors who have always been traveling and always been moving. um like we've never been stagnant people. Our island has never been stagnant or isolated or little, right? So I feel like for many like youth nowadays, like they understand that a little bit more than I would have understood when I was in high school. Most definitely, like
Oh,
because around when I was like even moving the plane, like I found that so like daunting. I was like, why is it that like I had to move from my high school, or like move from my school, leave all my friends behind, and even like having to talk a certain way. It's like you have your interview voice versus like your accent. I feel like when I first moved to like Washington, I had like the strongest accent ever, like, and then people didn't understand what I meant, or like what I meant by certain things. So I was like, okay,
yeah.
let me,
Yeah,
yeah.
unfortunately, all of my accent is completely gone at this point. But I remember doing that too, where um I would, like in Guam we'd say orange, and I like said like orange. We'd say like mountain in Guam, and I say mountain. Like
Oh,
like little things like that were just, little things that actually honest they end up being really big things.
yeah.
I'm so which were detrimental, I guess, to, created this like such a learning curve that was made me ashamed of like being from Guam,
Mm,
and just all those things, like just like being immersed in this westernized culture and like trying to figure that out. And when you're young, like middle school, maybe in high school, you're at least around the time I was in middle school and high school, you weren't concerned, preserving my culture wasn't
your priority.
that I was even thinking about at that point.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy that I feel like there's this, especially like next generation, like the cool people, the younger people,
The
whatever.
cool people.
But I feel like there's just this uprising. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Beautiful.
I do have one question for you before, unfortunately, we're gonna have to end
Yeah.
this meeting. But
Yeah.
um, so all the things we talked about, all the topics, the issues we covered, how is that reflected in your art? How do you think it reflects in your art? I know, take your time. I know it's like
Yeah.
loaded.
Um, I guess it's reflected in my art. Well, the first piece that I drew that's located on my Instagram, right? At Disha.c if anyone wants to follow.
It'll in my hands when I edit it right here. Right
Okay.
here. Okay. Hopefully I can edit that and we'll see.
Yeah.
But
Um, yeah, I haven't my nana again, my nana passed away in November 30th of 2019, and that was the last time I drew. So now that it's close to November 30th in 2022, I picked up my tablet again, and the first picture that I drew was out of homesickness. And when I say homesickness, it was more of like feeling sick over the distance that exists between myself and my partner, myself and my family, and myself and home, right? And by home I mean Guahan. So the part of it, I drew this like really colorful picture because I was like, I don't want it to be gray and dull, and I love color. So it it started off with like, I drew Guahan, and then I drew like a girl crying. And then in there I was like, it's not Guahan, without putting like Pratehi, like, on the top where um like Texan is located. So I was like, so much of like those movements or conversations exist in my art. They just exist as like little like features. So I feel like you have to actually like work, like kind of weave your way through it, right? It's like there's the big picture, but I always pay attention to these small details that are within either the background or just like tossed in there. So yeah, I have like other, or there's another piece too that every single part of my art is like a reflection of something. So you'll see it in a couple of the entries that I made. There's like one which was a reflection on No Country for Eight Spotted Butterflies by Julian Uggen, who's wonderful and amazing Chamorro writer and scholar and everything, right? But yeah, it's like giving small hints here and there of like using art as a way of introducing conversations that need to be like further spoken about, or more of my reflections on how I've engaged with a certain text. And I think with the cover, so with the cover for the Fanachu zine, like it's the title is like Voices from the Diaspora, right? So I made it, I was like, how do I draw this? First off, right? I was really struggling with the term even diaspora and how to write that. So I drew it in a way that again like puts ties together. I made it like a collage where I took different parts of our culture, Lati stones, like pottery, pieces that you would find in places like Latexan. And I kind of wove them together into this like studio Ghibli-esque art piece. Um, and I have like different like features in there too. Like there's women coming out from like the water, women coming out from the ground, and of
I
course,
feel
like female empowerment somewhere in there.
like
So
it represents so many emotions just in
yeah,
which is what
yeah,
we do experience as being a part of the diaspora. So I
yeah.
think it's perfect.
So I guess like that's something that I would have for like folks who are like looking at the cover of the zine is it's an open conversation, right? So just to share like what emotions came out when they were looking at the piece, what did they find? Um yeah, because I feel like that's one thing, right? It's like it's always about how did something make you feel, and that's what we always remember. And yeah, especially being like, in the diaspora right now, which is crazy to think about. Even yeah, it's crazy to think about just what that means. And um if like people even were to like, draw or doodle what that is to them, like what emotions came out or what did you remember during the process or who did you remember, it would be like so cool to know that too. So I'm just putting that out there, right? Like it's meant to be an open conversation, kind of something like that. So conversation starter. Yeah.
Okay, well, we are going to unfortunately have to end this meeting. It's Zoom's fault, guys. But thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank
talk to
you.
me. Such a pleasure. I know whenever I have conversations with Chamorros, which I don't honestly, you think I would have more opportunity. I don't. I just feel so much better. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Fanatsu with me. And thank you guys for joining us. I will link all of Deja's her Instagram and any other platforms that you can find her on for artwork. And then also make sure to follow us, Fanatsu, on Facebook, Instagram. Most importantly, become a part of our Patreon for some exclusive content. So thank you so much.